Hi everyone. So I'm going to try and give you an overview of our latest sharding design, kind of as a research update. The design is very fresh, just a few days old. So our latest design is basically 4 different layers, which is quite cool because everything is decoupled and you can think of them separately and implement them separately. So at the very top we have the deposit layer where validators can make deposit with ETH, and that's done in the main chain in a special contract called the Sharding Manager contract. So yeah, remember that sharding is a proof-of-stake protocol. And then we have this second layer, which is completely new, called the clock layer. So it's a beacon chain which provides a heartbeat for the rest of the system, and with every heartbeat provides a random output. And this random output will be used to seed some randomness in the lower layers. The third layer is the most interesting one, the data layer. This is where the validators comes to consensus as to what data is available in the shards. This is the most challenging problem, the data availability problem. How do we know that the data in the shards can be downloaded, because no one is a full node of the whole system. And then the final layer is the state layer, where basically we take the data, which is kind of uninterpreted, like raw blobs of data, and we give the data meaning. We give it a notion of transaction, a notion of state, and kind of from a theoretical standpoint, this layer is the easiest because it's not a consensus game. It's a deterministic execution game. So if you have your EVM, which is defined, and you have the data which is available, then it's just a matter of plugging in the input data into the EVM, and then you'll have a deterministic output. And this allows us to basically postpone all the complexity of the EVM, including cross-shard transactions and all this stuff, to some later point in time. Okay, so the SMC is the place in the main chain which keeps track of the validator pool. Anyone who has made a 32 ETH deposit and has made a commitment for the beacon chain, which I'll talk about later. And as a validator, you will be called upon on a randomized basis, on a random schedule, to perform various tasks. You might be called upon as a proposer to extend the shards with new data. You might be called upon as an attester or a notary, which is basically to download data and attest that this data is available and sign off on this claim. Or you might be called upon as a meta-notary, which is to take checkpoints of the shards and reincorporate them into the main chain. Oh. Can you go back?
I'm over here.
Even more. Okay. Okay, so this is what the shards look like. So every shard is just a kind of a vanilla blockchain. We know how these work. There's headers and there's blocks. And the point of sharding is that as a validator, you only have to keep track of the headers. Well, sorry, every validator has to keep track at the minimum of all the headers of every single shard. You basically have to be a light client for all the shards. And then, as a validator, you will be called upon on a randomized basis to actually download the block data. And this is how we get scalability. And actually, it's quadratic scalability in the sense that the total throughput of the system is going to be the throughput of one individual shard multiplied by the number of shards. And both of these are constrained by the computational power of a single computer. So if you double the computational power of your computer, we can have twice as bigger blocks and twice as many shards, 4 times more scalability. Okay, so I'll briefly talk about the random beacon, which is this new component. The random beacon sits between the main chain and the shards, kind of like connective tissue, providing a heartbeat. So how do we construct it? Well, every validator, when they come in, they will pick a seed and create what's called a hash onion. So basically keep hashing and hashing and hashing the seed until you've hashed sufficiently many times to have the outer layer be a commitment. And then when you unpeel the layers of the onion, basically you're revealing a pre-image. You reveal a pre-image, and this pre-image will match the previous commitment. And then so what you have is a chain of pre-images and commitments. And this looks like a bit like a random beacon in and of itself. So every validator has its own local random beacon. And the idea of the beacon chain is to combine these local beacons into a global one. So how do we do that? So we start off with the assumption of a global clock. Each tick is 5 seconds. And we start the random beacon at 0. And for every beacon output, this determines a set of ranked validators who will be invited to reveal their pre-image. So first, the validator at rank 1 will be invited to reveal his pre-image. And he does. And so we can move on. We have a new set of ranked validators. And then the game continues. But here something bad happens. In tick 3, the validator in rank 1 didn't reveal his pre-image. So the validator in rank 2 will be invited to join in, and the random beacon continues. So it just stalls for 5 seconds. Okay, the data layer. This is like the most meaty part and the most interesting. So the data layer is basically evolves with several processes. And the first of these processes is proposals. So the idea that as a validator, you can create new data to extend the blockchains. Now, one of the constraints with proposing is that if you want to make good proposals, you need to be aware of the state of the shard that you're in order, for example, to prioritize transactions best and make more revenue with transaction fees. And because syncing a new blockchain from scratch takes time, you can't be shuffled across the shards too often. So we take the pool of validators, and then on an infrequent basis, for example, once a week, we partition the pool into local proposal pools, one per shard. And then within each pool, and for every heartbeat, we have a new proposer which is selected at random from the local pool, and they will get to produce a new block, new shard block. And these shard blocks point back to the random beacon which provides the heartbeat. Okay, so the second process is what we call attestation. So the idea of attestation is, as a proposer, we don't want to give you single-handedly access to extending the blockchain. We want kind of to add friction, especially against malicious behavior. So for every new block that is created, we will randomly choose a small committee of size, let's say 5, and we're going to require that 5 of the committee members, which we call attesters, need to sign off on your new proposal. And the committee is just randomly selected from the pool. And if you've got your attestations, your 3 signatures, then you're good to go, and this block is considered valid. And others can start building upon it with new proposals, etc., etc. Until something bad might have happened. So you see here, this new block is not building on the tip of the chain. It's kind of forking off. And that's kind of bad behavior. So we're expecting the committee of attesters to notice that and say, I'm not going to sign off on this. And indeed, this is what happens. This block doesn't get enough signatures to be attested, and so it's considered invalid. And then the chain grows a little bit more. We have a new forking opportunity, but this time, the committee did sign off. So the committee is not perfect. It might contain malicious people, or the committee might, disagree as to what the head is. But it's a good kind of first layer of friction to prevent malicious behavior. And so that's why every 100 blocks, we have a much more robust process, which we call notarization. So this bottom block here has a little star, which means that it's a checkpoint. It's been notarized. And notarization, unlike the previous attestations, it's a much bigger committee of 400 notaries. And 400 is actually not a totally at random number. It's, if you assume that the set of validators is 2/3 honest, so 66% of the validators are honest, then 400 is the size of committee for which, with very high probability, at least half of these notaries are honest. And so every 100 blocks, you want to create a new checkpoint. And this is done basically by having the committee first figure out what the longest chain is, the head is, and then providing the signatures, and then giving this block a checkpoint, making a checkpoint. And then there's this final step, which is meta-notarization. So with meta-notarization, you take the checkpoints across all the shards, you aggregate them, and you feed them back into the main chain. And what that does is that creates tight coupling between the shards and allows for things like cross-shard communication. And it also allows for the shards to benefit from the finality of the main chain. So when there will be tight coupling between the shards and the main chain, the Casper finality loop will basically run over these meta checkpoints which live in the main chain, and then the shards can't revert back without also reverting the main chain. Okay, so I just want to end up with two cryptoeconomic gadgets which will make our design much more robust. So the first one is the idea of proof of custody. So what I said previously is that basically you have these attesters and notaries which will sign off on the availability of data, but they can make malicious votes. So for example, they can say, I have been able to download the data, but actually they haven't. And they have an incentive to do this because they get rewarded for every vote that they make. And so one idea is proof of custody, where we want the attester or the notary to prove that they have custody of the file at the time of signing. So this is quite strong. And so what we do is we take the file, and then we break it up into very small chunks. And then we pick a secret salt, which we keep for ourselves for the time being. And we concatenate the same secret salt with every data chunk. And then we Merkleize all of this. And the Merkle root, which is in green here, is going to be a proof of custody. And so you see, the only way to create a valid proof of custody is to actually have the underlying data. And this proof of custody will be included in the vote with your signature. And the idea is that after some period of time, you will be forced to reveal your secret salt so that this proof of custody is publicly verifiable. And if the salt combined with the file doesn't match the proof of custody, then you will be slashed. You can be challenged. So what this means is that we've created a system with skin in the game, where if you make a vote, it's quite a strong vote. The other cool construction is the idea of aggregate signatures. So remember this concept of quadratic scaling. basically, the number of shards that you can have is bounded by the number of light clients that an individual computer can process. And so we want to minimize the overhead per light client. And right now, the main bottleneck is processing all the signatures. It's not the storage, it's not bandwidth, it's just signature processing. And so we have this construction where where an individual claimer can take a bunch of signatures and for each signature have a corresponding bit set to 1 in a bit field. And then this small bit field is attached with a collateral, and basically the claimer is making the claim that he has access to all the signatures. And if a bad claim was made, then whichever notary corresponds to this bit can challenge, because the notary knows they haven't made the signature, and they can have the claimer be slashed. So that's a way to have more shards because we have less overhead on the signatures. And that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well done, Justin Drake.